Okay, so that was question one. So that's basically just thinking of how to solve for the equilibrium price and quantity traded, um, assuming that we have free trade. You can also figure out, so I figured out, the quantity traded. You can also go back and figure out the specific values for the quantity demanded and supplied at home by plugging in for the world price too. So, the quantity demanded at home is going to be 15, the quantity supplied at home is going to be 10. The quantity demanded in foreign is going to be 10. The quantity supplied in foreign is going to be 15. And so you can note that, you can also figure out the specific values for production and supply with world prices. So moving on to question two. Question two is now where we're going to consider a new type of trade policy. So what we're going to consider is we're going to consider that home is going to implement a production subsidy for USB producers. So what that's going to do is that if producers receive a given price that's determined by the world market, that's going to increase the price that they receive by 0.05. And what we want to consider is like, what is going to be the impact of this policy on welfare in our home country, and we want to calculate the numerical value of the change in welfare compared to question one, a totally free trade world where we had no policies such as tariffs or subsidies. So what we want to do is we want to think, okay, how has everything changed now that the subsidy is being applied compared to where we have free trade in question one. Okay, and so what we want to do is we want to systematically think about how this production subsidy is going to affect things for both home and foreign. So let's think about foreign's export supply curve, for example. Well, home applying a production subsidy in no way affects the ability of foreign to supply. It doesn't affect foreign's demand or supply curves. So this is basically, this is all the same as before. It's the same as in part one. So that doesn't change. What does change is that basically if we go back to what home's demand and supply functions are, well, home's demand stays the same, so this is the same. But if now there's before, basically, this is what domestic producers were receiving. Well, now what they'll do is they'll receive 5 plus 5 times whatever the world price is, plus 0.05. And so now, afterwards, what they'll do is they'll receive 5 plus 5 over 2 plus the world price. And so if I just add these two terms together, what I'll get is that the new supply curve effectively faced by domestic producers is going to be 15 over 2 plus 5 times the world price. And so that's reflecting that the government is stepping in to assure that producers receive a higher price for their goods, regardless of whatever the world price is for that good. Okay, and so again, recall that I said that this is going to be 15 over 2 plus 5 times PW. And PW is prime here. And the reason that we're rewriting the world price with primes is that we're assuming that the subsidy can change the price, change the world price. And so that's why all of the world prices now have a tilde. So this is world price tilde, reflecting that the subsidy can change the world price, and indeed it will. So, so this is the same. So we're just plugging in this in there, and recall that I said that this was 15 over 2 plus 5 PW, and so what that's going to give me is it's going to give me that if this is 20. Sorry, there's something wrong with my math here. this. Let me see. I didn't make this up. Let's see. Okay, so let's just sorry, I'm not sure if I'm remembering this correctly. So so this is equal to 20 minus 5 PW. The second term, let's multiply that out. This is going to be negative 5 minus negative 5 PW minus 5 over 2. Okay, so these terms combine to give us 15. These terms combine to give us negative 10 PW, and we still have 5 over 2. And so then this is 15 is the same as 30 over 2 minus 5 over 2 minus 10 PW, and so that gives us 25 over 2 minus 10 PW. Okay, and so sorry, this is a really badly written 25. So that's the same as this. So that's how we figured out what the new import demand curve for home is. Okay, so the equilibrium price here can be computed in the exact same way. We're just taking the sort of new import demand curve and for home and setting it equal to the old export supply curve for foreign. And so what does that give us? Well, if we add 5 to both sides, well, that's the same as adding 10 over 2 to both sides. And then if we add 10 PW prime to both sides, what does that give us? Well, that gives us that 35 over 2 has to be equal to 20 PW. And so dividing by 20 on both sides, we get that 35 over 40 is equal to PW prime. 35 over 40 just reduces down to 7 over 8. And so we get that we must have a new world price of 0.875. Okay, so so notice that now the new equilibrium world price is actually lower than what the equilibrium price was under free trade. So under free trade, we had that the world price was equal to 1, and so now the world price is dropped due to the subsidy. It's dropped to 0.875. Okay, and so now we have the new price, but what's the new price at home? Well, the new price at home, well, if you're a consumer, for consumers, the new price at home is just equal to the new world price. So, if I'm a consumer at home, then the government doesn't ask me to pay more. Well, it does through taxes, but effectively I face the same price as the world. But for firms, whatever the world price is, they're now receiving this government benefit of 0.5 or this subsidy on whatever the new price is. And so if the old price was 8.75, then we just add 0.5, and so what is that going to give us? It's going to give us that the that the new price is just going to be it's going to be 1.375, and so firms effectively are going to face this new price. Okay, and so that's going to be the price faced by firms. Then finally, what we want to do is we want to figure out the quantity traded out of the subsidy. So both foreign exports supply and home import demand are written in terms of the new price, not the price faced by producers. So what I can just do is I can just take foreign export supply, plug in for the new world price. So that's going to be 7 over 8. And so I'm plugging in here, I get 5 plus 10, 7 over 8. What I get is I get that this is equal to 70 over 8 minus, minus 40 over 8. So what I get is I get that this is equal to 30 over 8 or 5 over 4, 15 over 4. And so the new quantity of USB adapters traded is going to be, I believe this is 3.75. And so, of course, the amount of imports demanded must equal to the amount of exports. So the import demand of home is also going to be equal to 3.75. And so that's how we figured out the quantity traded out of the subsidy. So this is the slide saying that, saying what I already said. And indeed, we have that the price faced by producers at home, but not consumers, is going to be equal to 1.375. Okay. And so, now what we want to do is we figured out the new, price under the subsidy, the new quantity that's traded. We also want to figure out what's change in welfare. So let's think about first what's going to be producer. Actually, sorry. Let's start off with consumer surplus. So initially, under free trade, we had that the world price was equal to 1. And so consumer surplus is just going to be the area between the demand curve and the initial price. So it's going to be this shaded area here. Oops, sorry. Okay. But now for consumers, the subsidy has actually increased the terms of trade for home. That is, it's reduced the world price of the good in question, which is USB adapters. And so now consumer surplus, consumers have basically gained this amount here. And so consumers have, as a result of the lower price, they've increased their consumption from 15 units to 15.65 units. Okay. So, let's just looking at those areas, that means that consumers have gained areas C, D, E, F, and G. So initially at this world price of 1, producers had a surplus given by this shade. But now producers face basically whatever the new world price is. So the new lower world price is 7/8. And then plus whatever that is, plus 0.05. And so producers now effectively face this price because it's a price guaranteed or subsidized by the government. And so now producers have a surplus of this. And so you can see that producers have gained area A. Okay. Of course, what has, so far it's both producers and surplus, producers and consumers have gained, but this comes at a cost to the government. And so the government must subsidize basically the total number of units produced here. So it's subsidizing 11.875 units. That's the increased amount of production due to the subsidy now. And then it must subsidize basically the difference between the world price, the prevailing price, and then what the price that's given to consumers is. So basically, the government has to be paying that total amount shaded there to in order to boost up the price effectively faced by producers. So that results in the government having to spend A, B, C, D, and E. And so finally, if we add up all those, we find that what are the gains here? Well, the gains are the areas F and G for consumers. And what is the loss here? Well, the loss here is that the government has to spend this area B, which isn't recouped by producers because it's not a rent that's above the price that they're receiving net costs. Okay. And so the government is losing, or sort of the deadweight loss here is effectively B. And so, you can sort of see that if the areas of F and G are larger than the area of B, then we'll have a net welfare gain. So this will, be a net welfare gain if this is true. And so you can see that what we're going to need to do to figure out whether or not there's a welfare gain is to calculate the area of B, F, and G. So let's do that. So what's going to be the area of B? Well, it's a triangle. So what's that going to be is the area is going to be half times 11.875, this is the base, minus 10, times the height, and that's going to be the difference between the initial world price and the new producer price, which is going to be 0.375. Okay, F is a rectangle, so that's easy. So it's going to be basically a base times height. So the base is going to be 15 minus 11.875. This is going to be the difference between new production and old consumption times the difference between the price faced by consumers initially and the price lower price faced by consumers now. And then finally, G is going to be another triangle, so we take half times the base, which is going to be equal to 0.6 times 25 times the height, which again is going to be 1 minus 875, like we had before. Okay, and so this next slide has calculated all those areas out very conveniently for us. Turns out that B is going to be 0.35, F is going to be 0.39, and G is going to be 0.04. And so adding all this up, we get that the net welfare gain is equal to exactly, I'm not sure why that's approximate, 0.08. And so as a result, we've seen that this subsidy here is welfare increasing. Which is good. Okay, so that's question 2. Before, I just want to move on to a small tangent. So recall that I said that you know, what we have is that this is foreign's export supply curve if it's greater than 0. So let's double check that what condition is going to yield such that this is going to be greater than 0. Well, this is the same as saying that this is greater than 0, or that -5 must be greater than -10 P W. So dividing by -10 on both sides, what do I get? I get that basically half must be greater than or equal to the world price. And so whenever the world price is greater than a half, we have that foreign wants to foreign supplies more than it demands, and so foreign will be an exporter. Okay, but notice that if we calculated the equilibrium price equal to 1, then you know this world price is greater than 1, and so indeed we've confirmed that foreign is going to be exporting in this case. You can do the exact same thing for a home. You can calculate under what condition a home is going to be a net importer. That's going to be equivalent to saying that 15 must be greater than 10p, or that the world price, excuse me, must be less than 3/2. Again, you know, the world price here that we've calculated is 1, which is less than 3/2. So indeed, under this range of prices, we found that home is going to be a net importer and foreign is going to be a net exporter. So that would be how we double check that assuming that foreign is an exporter and home is an importer is okay to do in this setting. Okay, so for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip this question, and then I'm going to move on to question 4. Actually, no, let's go through this one real quickly. Okay, so it's going to be question 3. How does the impact of a production subsidy compare with the specific import tariff of 0.5? So I've already done this in section 9. And so what we want to do is, you know, we want to think about the welfare impact of the production subsidy that we just thought about and compare it with the welfare impact of a specific import tariff, and with all the dynamics of the specific import tariff being exactly what we've seen before. So A specific import tariff, what is that going to do? Recall that it's going to raise the price for both consumers and producers, as opposed to a subsidy that we previously considered, which just increases the price for producers. So, if home is applying a specific import tariff, then, relative to world trade, that the application of that tariff might change the world price, which is why I'm calling the new world price PWW, or P prime prime, or sorry, PW tilde tilde. Okay, and so, but anyway, it might affect the world price, but it's a movement along the same foreign export supply curve that we've seen before. It's not a shift. The foreign's export supply curve remains unchanged. What does change is the effective price that home producers and consumers face. And so whatever the world price is, consumers are going to have to pay a price of half more, and producers are going to receive a price of half more. So if you do the math here, it turns out that home's new import demand is going to be 10 minus 10 P W tilde tilde. Okay, solving for the equilibrium price is going to be exactly the same as before. We set import demand equal to foreign export supply. So if I add 5 to both sides here and add 10 PW tilde tilde to both sides, what do I get? I get 15 has to be equal to 20 PW prime prime, or that 15 over 20 is equal to PW prime prime, which is the same as 3/4. So I get that the new world price must be equal to 0.75. And then from there, if I want to figure out, for instance, what the sort of quantity of USB adapters that's traded is, again, I can just take home's import demand, plug in for 3/4, which is going to be the new price. That's going to give me 10 minus 10 times 3/4. And so that's 10 minus 7.5, which is equal to 2.5. So the quantity traded is going to be 2.5. And then, if I know the world price, the new lower world price, then if I just add 0.5 onto that, then 1.25 is going to be the new higher price faced by producers and consumers. Okay, and so you can note, one thing to note is that, recall that the free trade equilibrium, or PW, was equal to 1. The subsidy equilibrium was that the world price was going to be equal to, I believe it's 7.7 over 8. So I think it's 0.875. Let me double check. Yeah. And so you can note that the application of a specific tariff decreases the world price even more than the application of a subsidy did. And so basically what this is implying is that a tariff decreases home's import demand by more than a subsidy does. And so the decrease in import demand means that the larger decrease in import demand from home means that now import demand, the decrease in import demand has decreased world prices. And so we have a stronger terms of trade effect from the application of a tariff than we do have from a subsidy. Okay, but of course, looking at prices isn't enough to quite tell us what the welfare gains are here. And so to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to return to a very similar graph that we've worked on last time, and thinking about the change in consumer welfare and producer welfare and government revenues. So producers are going to lose out here because initially they were consuming at a price of 1. Now they have to consume at a higher price of 1.25. So they lose out on all these areas, A, B, C, and D. Producers now can produce at a higher price, so they gain producer surplus of A. But the government the government will gain revenue here of basically the amount of that the tariff, the amount of the tariff times the amount of imports. So the tariff is basically the difference between the world price and the price that producers and consumers domestically face. And imports are basically just the difference between domestic consumption and production. And so the government gains C and E. So if you add up all those, you see that the net welfare gain is E minus B minus D. And so if we want to think about whether or not that's net welfare increasing or not, it's going to depend on whether or not the area of E is greater than the area of B and D. So whether or not the increased tariff revenue given by E is greater than the deadweight losses of B and D. So what's the area of E? It's a rectangle, so we're just going to take the size of the base times the height, which is just going to be 0.25. What's the area of B? It's going to be half times the base, which is just going to be 1.25 here, times its height. That's going to be 1/4 or 0.25. What's going to be the area of D? It's going to be, again, another triangle. So here, its base is going to be this as well, and its height is going to be the same. In general, the areas of B and D won't be equal if the slopes of supply and demand aren't the same, but here they are. So we've gotten that the two formulas are the same, and so they have the same area. Okay, and so then doing out all the math, we can figure out the areas of E, B, and D. And it turns out when we add these up, we get that indeed we have that the terms of trade effects have outweighed the deadweight losses due to the tariff. And so the net welfare gain is positive, and so the tariff, again, is welfare increasing too. But recall that, if I call this the net welfare gain, or NWG, then recall that the net welfare gain for subsidies was 0.08. And so the net welfare gain for subsidies is going to be less than the net welfare gain for the application of this tariff. And so you can note that that consumers, our economy as a whole, from Home's perspective, would be better off with the application of a tariff than a subsidy. Why is that the case? Well, note that, as I said earlier, the tariff reduces import demand more, and so it reduces the world price more. So there's a larger terms of trade effect for the tariff, and likewise a smaller terms of trade effect for the production subsidy. It decreases the world price less. Therefore, Home under the production subsidy is going to bear the larger proportion of the tax burden. Note that the sort of tax, if we consider tariffs or subsidies a tax, which they implicitly are, then you can note that taxes, sort of the incidence of a tax is going to fall both on home and on foreign. But the fact that the world price is reduced more, that's good for Home's consumers, and so relative the subsidy relative to the production subsidy, Home is going to bear a larger proportion of the tax burden, because in their case they're not going to have a terms of trade decrease as much under the subsidy as they will under a tariff.